Hello, this is Charles Epstein, the host of the X Factor podcast. Appearing before these microphones for the second time is Harold G. Ford III, the practice director for the Employer Solutions practice at NetatWork. Hey, Harold.
Hey, Charles. How are you?
I'm doing well. Really enjoyed our first podcast on the age of the employee experience. Got some really good response to it on this side. Have you had a chance to speak to anybody? You checked it out, Harold?
Yes, I have. And I've had folks reach out to me. I've kind of extended that in some of the conferences and conversations I've been having both locally and statewide here in the wonderful state of Pennsylvania. Had some really engaging conversations with folks, just HR professionals, about employee experience, about the workforce, how AI today, shifting the topic from AI taking over jobs to using AI to augment what you're doing in the workforce, and how do we better train our workforce to use the power of AI so they're more effective. So it's been great.
Yeah, no, it's an important topic. For those who've not yet heard the podcast, well, first of all, what's taking you so long? Do check it out. And I should mention that Harold will be joining me, as he did in the first one, as one of my rotating co-hosts, and to fundamentally ask the question, how should organizations rethink their day-to-day HR, IT, and business processes and all the associated organizational challenges in the age of AI? So, it's a pretty broad, but I think still focused topic. And I should mention that as one of the benefits, of being a co-host, is you get to introduce the guest, Harold.
Yeah, and I did mention, kind of amongst my travels, and today, super happy to welcome Geoffrey Klein. I got to hear Geoffrey speak on the topic of AI in HR at a conference, and connected that way. Geoffrey's a diverse, got a lot of diverse talents. He's the CEO and founder of 9 Dots, and that organization helps businesses create compelling story-driven visual content. And he's also an AI consultant. He's a TEDx speaker. He's a Wharton lecturer. He's a best-selling author, so a man of many talents. And we're really excited to have Geoffrey on here today and kind of grill him a bit on the world of AI and storytelling and all things. I think you've titled yourself an AI humanist.
I have. Thank you for having me. And for those kind words, I'm blushing slightly. And I will do my utmost to deliver on the results of that beautiful intro.
Yeah, I should mention that one of the things that we really do want to get to is storytelling, the importance of storytelling in the age of AI. But we have a lot other things to talk about as well. Geoffrey, you've lived and worked in New York, LA, Manchester, England, and now in the greater Philly area, which begs the question, what sports teams do you root for?
I'm going to tell you, I actually think about this question. I lived in Manchester, England for 10 years. And in England, they always say that the common question when you meet people is, who do you support? Who do you support? Who do you support? And particularly in Manchester, they have two very rival football, and I use the European football soccer teams. So for 10 years, people would say, well, who do you support? And for 10 years, I would answer the Eagles or the Sixers. And they would kind of, look at me a little funny. I am, like my father, not as much a sports fan as a Philly sports fan. So I'm diehard Eagles, diehard Sixers, diehard Phillies, diehard-ish, Flyers. So yeah, I'm born and bred in Philly, and I continue to support the teams in their good and bad.
Now, Harold, I'm assuming that you're kindred spirits. You must be a fan of Philly sports teams.
That's why I brought Geoffrey in to kind of beat up on your New York fandom here. I'm Philly do or die. So Eagles, Phillies, Sixers. All things bleed green for sure. So
yeah, I'm feeling a little bit outnumbered. Anyway, Geoffrey, really do appreciate you taking time to spend.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Early in your career, you were assistant to the president of production with Paramount and MGM. So, which begs the question, what were some of the movies you were involved with, and what does an assistant to the president of production do? And how many times have you had to deal with Dwight Schrute references over this period of time?
Thankfully, not too many Dwight references. I think because of the time the Office hadn't come out here. I always tell people, I had incredible experience working in the film industry. It was a dream. But I want to be very clear. I was a peon, but my boss was a big deal. So the studio, you go to a movie and you watch it and you see the studio logo at the beginning, and then you see the producer and director. The studio is the money behind all of it. So a movie doesn't get made in the studio system unless they pay for it. And so my boss's job was to make sure things stayed on schedule and stayed on budget. And my job was to support her. So we dealt with whether it was the development of a project, so paying writers to rewrite stuff, deciding what projects to pay to buy, sometimes they're bidding wars, and then through the whole entire production, dealing with crises, whether the director isn't happy, the producer isn't happy. And so I'm helping coordinate her world. And I got to work on some amazing movies, The Truman Show, Mission Impossible 2, Sleepy Hollow, the South Park movie, Legally Blonde, one of the Bond movies, Die Another Day. So I had a nice breath, and it was amazing.
It's interesting you mentioned football or soccer. I watch soccer. It almost seems like a miracle when a goal is scored. It just does. All things have to align in order for that ball to squeak past the goalie. And the more you know about movies, it's always seems to be a miracle that any movie gets made, given the obstacles and all the moving parts. Was there any one particular movie that you worked on that was particularly sad? I know you say you were a peon, but still you were attached in some way, even if peripheral. Any movie that you say, oh my God, it's an amazing thing that movie got made, and it's a good thing that movie got made. Or conversely, maybe not so good that it got made.
I have more of the latter, unfortunately, but I wouldn't want to badmouth any of the projects I once worked on. I think of, The Truman Show is my favorite movie of the ones that I had some minimal, role in. And it had, it went through development, it went through some script changes. There's some major things in the movie that ended up in the movie that didn't start in the movie. And so it is a collaborative process. And Andrew Niccol, who wrote the script, who was super talented and really, inventive. It's not easy because, the joke is if you're a first-time writer and they buy your scripts, the studio buys your actual script, and you're like, oh my God, the dream, I've just sold my script. The first thing they do is rewrite it. Almost always. And oftentimes it's another, oh, we love you so much. Now we're going to hire a big-time writer to come in and fix it. So it's a miracle that, as you said, any movie gets made. I think, one of the things I'll say about both my bosses is, which is not true of all studio executives, they were movie fans to start with. And so they understood story and the importance of it and character and all the things that but there are some forces that are bigger than that, and they just churn out, Fast and the Furious 23 or whatever it is. And it's rare that you get movies that are original in their thinking. And I think The Truman Show, part of the reason I think I liked it so much is it was definitely not what you're used to seeing in the movies, generally speaking.
Yeah, it was a very provocative premise, and I think it's still relevant today. Truman Show.
Yeah, I agree.
Many a time thinking that I was still that I'm in the Truman Show. Have you ever done that? You just get out of bed, and you're like, is this all? Where's the camera?
Yeah, no, it feels like a simulation. Yes,
that's right.
Or sometimes sometimes it's wishful thinking that it's a simulation. You could always rewind, hit the pause button. But speaking of storytelling, which is, again, as I said at the outset, one of the things we want to focus on today with you, Geoffrey, obviously it's one of your main areas of expertise going back to these Hollywood studio days that you described. You did a TED Talk called Story Matters. First, why does story matter? What's the business case for spinning a ripping yarn? And what are the elements of a good story? And I'm going to leave it to you to break that down because I know it's a very complex, compound question.
Yeah, I believe story is the most. So to me, it all starts with what are we trying to do in business, personal. We're trying to connect with people, and the best way to connect with people is by effectively communicating. That's the goal. If you communicate well, then you connect with people. And I believe the best way to connect with people is through a story. And my TED Talk, and I reference a lot the science behind it. So there was a Princeton professor, or Hassan, who actually studied brain activity based on when people have different inputs. So if someone's given, the facts, the figures, the data of whatever the situation is versus a narrative that may have that in it, your brain reacts very differently. So when you're just given the facts, I was thinking of those old movies where like just the facts, man. Two parts of your brain activate, your Broca's and your Wernicke, which you need to understand the meaning. It's basically to decode the meaning. But when you tell someone a story, their brains light up. And not only do they light up, but they light up in a very specific way. And the concept that Professor Hassan had talked about was neurocoupling, which basically is that the person telling the story and the person listening to the stories, their brain activity mirrors one another. And I always use the example that if, I tell you a story about me kicking a ball, your motor cortex actually activates. There's also two rises in particular chemicals in the brain, cortisol and oxytocin. Cortisol is the stress hormone. It's all about paying attention. We're in an attention economy. How do you grab someone's attention? You tell them a story, all of a sudden that kind of fight or flight, it tells them there's something important going on. And then there's also a rise in oxytocin, which is the love hormone, which tells you, is the emotional connection that a lot of marketers talk about that is really important. So as a species, we're hardwired for story. And the results of it for businesses, when you tell a story, you get two increases. One in the understanding. So if you're a business and you want to communicate, do you want the people to understand what you're telling them? Yes. Then the story will help you do that. And also you want them to remember it. Well, by telling the story, there's a 20 to 40% lift in both understanding and memory of that material. So I believe that, the most effective advertising and marketing understands the need to use story and narrative to connect with the audience. That's the end of the day. You want to connect with your audience. In terms of the elements, I always joke about what should be included in a story, and people like character and, arc. And I would say, if you go back in time to, the early people, the biggest thing about story that's important is conflict. Because if you tell a story and it's just like this and it's just like this, and the people will be bored out of their minds. There needs to be, as Kurt Vonnegut describes, the shape of a story. And a good story, if you go back to Aristotle, which I love, you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I think so the structure of the story is what.
By the way,
matters.
if I may interject,
sure.
I'm sorry. The great Jean-Luc Godard at a press conference, you may know this anecdote, was asked Maestro, but surely because he was baffled by one of Godard's inherently baffling, but often great films. Maestro, surely believe that all films, all stories have a beginning, middle, and end. Godard immediately shot back. But of course, though not necessarily in that order. So, yes.
Yeah. I share a framework. And I think that's my feeling that people are like, well, I want to change up the order. You have to master it first. Then you can go and freak it.
Right.
So Quentin Tarantino has done it really well. He obviously understood movies and story from right now. Yeah, we can flip things around, or you look at a movie like Memento that's, mind-boggling, and you have to watch 3 or 4 times to really understand. But in business, I think there is a point to going linear in terms of taking your audience on the journey. And so I created this little framework called the story pad, the PAD, which is the beginning, middle, and end. The P is where you start because you need to hook your audience with whatever their problem is. So you start with their problem. So, because that will get people's attention. They'll go, oh, wait, I have that problem. And it also is a way of qualifying people. So if you're telling a story and you raise the problem and I don't have that problem, I won't listen anymore. And that's good. You won't waste any time on me. And then, so what's the middle of the story? The meat of the story is the answer. That's the A in StoryPad. And it's the answer. It's usually your product or service. So you have a problem, I've got the solution. And a lot of companies stop there. And I always think it's really important to include the D. the end of the story, which is the difference or the impact that your product or service will have on that person, on that customer or that client. And so you use this framework and you can apply it to any business, to any situation. I think it's just, and again, what I would say, start with this story pad, use it a bunch, see how it works. If you want to start flipping things around, first master the kind of foundational piece of it.
You bring that up. I've done some training in storytelling, and I use the CAR method, which is almost identical to the PAD method. It's the C is context. What's the problem? Who's the hero? What's the hero trying to achieve? A is action. How does the hero battle the villain, whatever the villain is? And then R is the result. What's the result? What did we learn? How did the story end? So it's very similar. It's very much aligned to your PAD method.
Yeah, and that's my version. There's a bunch of one. I would say if anyone really wants to learn about business and story, I wrote a book, best-selling book. I'm really happy about it, The Content Beast. But I always think if there was a book I could have been credited with writing, I think it's a great question to ask people. But for me, it's Donald Miller's Story Brand. And he does the most phenomenal way of taking the journey of the hero's journey and breaking it down. Now, what he does is not that different than what Joseph Campbell did or what ours, but he puts it in the business context in a way that I think is really gives you a way to implement. And so, yeah, you're going to hear the version because it's true. Like it's, as you said, that version of how to tell the story, it's not new. In fact, it's very, very old. But people are, there's the people who say, oh, it's not fact-based enough. I need to give them my features and benefits and the data and all that. And it's simply not the most effective way to communicate with your audience.
Which naturally, maybe not so naturally, but we do have to talk about AI at some point. Geoffrey, what prompted you to become an MIT AI certified consultant, and what does such a consultant do?
About when I was writing my book about content marketing, I recognized, and it was right after kind of the ChatGPT explosion happened, where everyone, OpenAI, everyone else was like, oh my God, AI. And I saw like, okay, I could see that this was going to have an impact on content marketing, let alone everything else. So I started to look into how it works and I kind of fell down the rabbit hole, is how I usually describe it. And the idea was I'm a speaker, and so I wanted to speak about content marketing and the intersection with AI. And what I found was that people really needed a foundational understanding of AI. What a lot of people, and I love the term AI literacy, you need to understand people are suffering from what I refer to as AI overwhelm. And the question is, how do you deal with that? Well, by educating yourself. So as a consultant, I speak at conferences, and then I give workshops on AI literacy. And then if you kind of graduate from there, then you get to AI competency. And so these are workshops intended to help people. How do you actually use these tools rather in a systematic way? Because most businesses are doing one of two things. In fact, I think it was at the conference that I spoke at, that Harold was, where someone said, yeah, we have an AI policy. No AI. That's the policy. And that is, so I call that the burying the head in the sand policy.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
The challenge with that is that even in organizations that say, no, you can't use AI, people are, because they're seeing the benefit of it. But so they're using it. I love the term shadow AI. It's like people using it but not telling anyone about it because they're afraid they're going to get it taken away. But they're using it without any training, education, guardrails, guidelines. And so that's a problem. And so part of what I'm trying to do is help people learn, like, you need to embrace it. There is a way to embrace it effectively rather than just, secretly people using it. The second kinds of organization I've seen is the ones like, yeah, we love AI. Here you go. Everyone gets their, license to ChatGPT. And then in 3 months they say, okay, where's my ROI? And they're like, well, I can write much better emails. And you're like, well, that doesn't seem worth it. Because again, you're giving them the tools without an instruction manual. You're saying, here are all the carpenter tools, go build me a house. And they're like, how do you use this, circular saw? It doesn't really. So my aim is to really advance AI literacy for organizations to take this technology. The genie's out of the bottle.
Right.
We have to embrace it, or you're going to get left behind. So I find one of the things I do as a educator is I take things and I synthesize them and I try and present them in a way that's digestible and actionable and accessible. And so that's, as a consultant, what I'm trying to do. I'm creating a framework to help people have steps to learn how to use AI and use AI effectively, which are two different things.
Yes.
Yeah, that's critical, using it effectively. And like you said, the ostrich methodology, just burying your head in the sand and pretending like, hey, we can ban its use. It's, I recall, I don't know if I told Charles this or not before. I recall us doing this about a dozen, maybe 15 years ago with social media. Oh, we're just going to ban social media in the workplace today. And now imagine so many years later talking about banning LinkedIn, and when it's a critical tool to train people, to recruit folks. Same thing here. And then on top of it, everyone's got AI in their pockets on their phone.
Yes.
We used to be worried about bring your own device. It's bring your own AI. And so how do we train folks, even, folks in different AI methodologies where someone's bringing Apple Intelligence and someone else is bringing Gemini, be able to combine that and say, hey, this is how you use these tools effectively for the betterment of what you're doing in the organization and what you're doing outside the organization when you go home every day. So I think it's super critical.
And I think that's a great analogy. Any new technology requires a strategy.
Right.
First you have to understand it, and then you have to decide how you're going to distribute and it's where people are, we fear what we don't know. And so we're like, we'll just put that away for now. And it's not going to help you. I'll leave you this comment. Paul Reutzer, who runs the Marketing AI Institute, he's kind of the one who's credited with the original one. It's like, AI is not going to take your job. People with AI are going to take your job. He says the future has three different kinds of organizations. AI native organizations, so new organizations that implement AI in everything they do. AI emergent companies, which are companies that are established and now they're learning how to implement and interface AI. And the third kind of company is obsolete.
Right. Well stated. But, the other piece of that, you mentioned making sure that AI is effective. I mean, a big issue that we grapple with, X-Files, the X Factor podcast, and the AIX platform is responsible AI, because you talk about shadow AI, obviously within the context of shadow IT, because there's so much stuff that's going on that's the CIO, CTO doesn't have any visibility into. And if you don't have a strategy where people don't understand that it's not always to be trusted, it doesn't always produce factual or sound information. And you run the risk of making a big mistake, embarrassing the company, or worse.
Yeah, there's two elements of trust that I think creep into AI. Number one is it makes stuff up still. And it's getting better. And I think the second one is the deep fakes and the synthetic data and, creating voices and all that. So there's two very distinct things. So in my presentation, I often say, be a spy. Trust no one.
Yeah. Trust but verify.
Really, right. And I think that what really you start out saying, I consider myself an AI humanist. And I think what that means for me is about being responsible and making sure that the human's in the loop. That's how you combat the trust, is you verify. You don't just accept what you get as a result. That's not the effective way to use AI.
In a previous podcast I did with Alon and Lorette from NetXpat, we talked about the importance of soft skills, EQ, cultural literacy, things we can do better than chatbots, at least for now. But one of these skills is communications. I know you mentioned your methodology for storytelling, but can someone actually learn to become a good storyteller?
Yes. I'll start with the answer and then I'll work backwards. Okay. Unlike a lot of debates and political things where they never answer the question. So I'll start with answering the question.
Thank you.
There's ways to, like many skills. I think that effective communication is a skill you can learn, and storytelling is a skill you can learn by practice and by technique and by understanding the fundamental pieces. And I teach a course in business communication at Wharton, and that's what we're teaching, that there is certain elements that you can use in order to communicate in an effective way. And the human part is like, one of the things I always think about, that AI will never be able to replicate my experience. So the story I tell about working in the film business, the story I tell about living in Philadelphia or being in Manchester, England, whatever my personal stories are, AI will never be able to capture those and share those in the same authentic way as a human being can. There's certain skills, and the soft skills. Interesting, there's an article almost a year ago about talking about for a long time, it was technical skills that were going to give you the difference in your career. Oh, if you're an engineer or things. And what they're saying is, with the advent of machine learning and the ability for machines to do a lot of the things technically, the soft skills are what's going to matter most. Interpersonal communication, being able to effectively manage people. Those are things that are not really going to work well. Having self-awareness, and intuition, instincts, imagination. These are all things that are, common sense, that are very uniquely human, that AI will try and replicate. And in some ways it does, some of the emotional stuff it does is not bad. But there are certain things that are just, I think, fundamentally human. And so being an AI humanist, it comes in two parts. One, it's about using AI so that you can spend more time on the things that are uniquely human, strategy and connecting with people and things like that. And the second thing is that, I'm writing a book called Connected Intelligence. It's about not just human intelligence, not just machine intelligence, but the collaboration and keeping the human in the loop. I think it's just the way forward is always going to be about helping use AI to be more human.
Yeah, augmenting what we're doing. So even, kind of going back to storytelling, it can create a story for us, right? It can tell us, what to do, but how we tell that story is very, very human of us. I mean, how I would tell a story to my executive team versus how I would tell it to employees, two different ways I would tell that story, because I'm picking up on, human interaction, social cues, messaging. It might be the same story told two different ways because of two different audiences.
How can SMBs, or just companies generally, use AI to improve storytelling? By the way, when we refer to storytelling, we mean using it for both standard public-facing communications and employee-facing communications, the latter, of course, being very important. There's so many workforces and teams working remotely these days. So I'm sure we've all used, I've used ChatGPT and some other of these platforms. You enter in several prompts until finally maybe you'll get close to what you want, and then you massage it. How are you using it, or how are you counseling others to use it?
A lot of people, so I think there's an art to how you prompt it that will get easier to do, because AI is learning to help you with the prompting. And a lot of times when you prompt it and you ask it to do something, you can actually ask it, what was the prompt you used? Because it doesn't necessarily use just the prompt that you put in the bar. It will then take it and rewrite the prompt to get more detail of what they think you're trying to accomplish. ChatGPT just came out with something called Canvas, which people should definitely go and check out. It's not separate. It's within ChatGPT. It's just the way it formats, where it has the kind of conversation and prompts on the one side and then the output on the other side. And the ability to edit is really remarkable, where you can say, yeah, add emojis to this document, or you can highlight a certain section, say, make this more formal or make this funnier or whatever. And I think that's, in terms of the storytelling, it's a lot of people refer to it to almost the 80-20 rule, which is AI can get you pretty far along with whatever task you're doing, especially with writing. But most of AI, if you don't get involved, it's going to be generic or adequate. It's not going to be great. And I think the distinction is when you take the output of AI, whether it's in a brainstorming session, so it can help you in terms of, hey, I'm trying to reach this audience. What do people in this audience care about? So you can learn. And I think that's the real benefit of AI, is to use it to abide by the 11th commandment, which is something I wrote in my book, which is know thy audience. because that's the key to storytelling, is knowing what your audience cares about. And so AI can help you do that. You can, give it lots of information about an audience and say, hey, what are the things that matter to this audience? And then start to go, what are some story ideas that would write me a first draft? And then that's where you have to go, oh, okay, I have well, they did get this right, but they didn't get that right. Or to take writing and then say, hey, I want to make this a little more informal. And then so you take your writing and style, and it's getting pretty good at about tweaking something you've written, or for you to take something that's written and then you tweak it. And it's that, kind of symbiotic relationship, which is why it's about the connection between how you use it and how AI use it. But I think in terms of, it's great for brainstorming right now. It's a writing, coach or, drafter, depending on your perception. But I like to write. And I say, I'm a writer. I like to write. And so I think the thing was that they're like, oh, it's going to take my job. Well, no, it's going to make me a better writer. And so how is it going to make you a better writer? By challenging your own writing. Because something like Grammarly, which I think is a phenomenal tool, although I think the new Canvas may end up usurping it. But Grammarly will go through a document and will tell you suggestions. It's up to the human to decide, no, that's not right. That's not the way I would say it. I said it that way for a reason. There's certain slang. And so making it authentically you or your brand. Now, it's getting pretty good. It's getting pretty good at mimicking tone and personality. Well, again, you can't trust it, and that's why you need to have eyes on it. And again, it's a relationship between, I say the best way to use AI is to treat it like it is, a junior employee who has the PhD level brain. It's a kind of interesting dichotomy.
Sometime ago when ChatGPT did just emerge and came on everybody's radar, so some crazy stuff at it, and I wanted to create some funny scenarios and push it to see if ChatGPT can create stuff that actually is genuinely funny. And actually wrote about that experience in the title, which will give you an indication of the outcome. ChatGPT, you're not funny. But I ended by saying, but that's, again, we talk about all this stuff is right now. Let's have this conversation in 6 months. It may be a very different conversation. I said, look, at some point, you're going to be able to say, okay, I want this to be written in the voice of Jerry Seinfeld with a little bit of Sam Kinison and maybe a couple of elements of Mel Brooks. Let's see what it comes up with. But what I am going to be doing is an experiment. I'm going to be taking those scenarios, and as I said, those scenarios didn't really produce anything that was really funny, and see with the latest version of ChatGPT if it's gotten funnier.
So in a lot of the training that I do in the realm of AI literacy, and just teaching people how to use prompts, because even in today's world, people think that it's a Google search. It's not a Google search, right? It's prompts. You've got to add context and add your own flair.
Sure.
But one of the things that I do is I show folks how you can use a tool like ChatGPT to be a mentor, where you can fill it full of prompts and have it challenge you on a weekly basis, which is something I do pretty much every Friday morning. I go into ChatGPT and on an ongoing thread that I have with it, have conversation with it. And I show people how to do it. But one of the things I interject is I tell it to do it in the words and spoken voice of Snoop Dogg. So when I present it with a challenge and it comes back and feeds me back, what is some of its advisement and some questions, but it does it as Snoop Dogg, and it's hilarious. I usually get some good laughs out of that, but I think that's funny. But Geoffrey, you brought up something kind of going back to this about know the audience, and it triggered something with me from an HR lens, because we have used in the HR world DISC assessments so heavily. I mean, our company uses DISC assessment for every new hire that comes in. My entire team has been DISC assessed, and we use it for collaboration, communication, better teamwork, better productivity. But if we could, and I'm sure there are tools today, now that got me thinking about it, where we could feed AI with DISC assessment to be able to read the audience. And now we've really got a methodology where it can create better stories, not perfect, because there's still critical thinking that needs to happen, right? We know of the horror stories of kids in college telling ChatGPT to write their term papers, and sight unseen they hand deliver them, and it's so blatantly AI. We need someone to really be that editor and have that lens. But if we could take something like a DISC assessment or other behavioral assessments to say, okay, this is my audience, and this is the story we're trying to tell, whether it's a vision of the organization, whether it's how we're going to proceed with a particular initiative within a company. I think that could really enhance AI, and that could be a great way for AI to augment what we're doing.
Yeah, I want to say two things. One in relation to what Charles was talking about with is you're not funny, and then also the DISC assessment. So I often say today is, whatever the date is, AI is the worst, the dumbest it will ever be. And so every day, every week, every month, it's getting smarter, it's getting better. I would recommend also trying the reasoning model of ChatGPT. So it'd be because it's slightly different in terms of how it operates, in terms of, so you may want to go to 0.01 preview and I would compare the two results between ChatGPT 4.0, which is the latest one, and then the O preview, which is actually the latest one, but it's the latest, uses advanced reasoning and whether or not it changes how its output is. And then in terms of whether it's DISC or other tools you're already using, you can feed that data into AI and say, hey, come up with some personalized ways to communicate to this group, or how can we do a team building exercise to share, or I have a team that has these 3 profiles. What are some of the things I need to be careful about, or what are some things, and start to use it to enhance what you would already be doing with those tools. So there's huge ability, and again, it's just getting smarter every day and getting better and better. But I think that's the next level of adoption will be when people start to recognize they have stuff, they have data, because data is one of the primary pieces of how effective AI is, both in the training level, but also in the inference level, inference being when you're using it. And the critical piece to use unlocking that is making sure it's done in a way that is responsible, and why I think education and having an AI policy is so important is you don't want rogue employees, even if they're not doing it intentionally, putting in documents that are proprietary, so I always say, if you're starting with AI, only use things that are publicly available. Like, or redact what you're going to use to make sure you're not putting in people's personal information to get the results. Because despite the fact that they say an enterprise level is safeguarded in a way, I don't think if it's sensitive, I wouldn't trust it yet.
Geoffrey, earlier this year, you did a post titled The AI Worldview Spectrum, which ranges from AI doomsayer to AI wary to AI optimist to supporters of effective accelerationism, parentheses, basically anything goes, end parens. Where were you on the spectrum when you wrote that, and where are you now, assuming that that has changed or your position has changed?
Well, yeah, I started as an optimist. I believe, I think generally that's oriented. I'm a tech. I always joke I have a term for myself, an NTG, a non-technical geek. So I can't code and I can't design, but I really love what technology can do. So I've always been a proponent of advancements in technology. That being said, I'm not saying it's the effective acceleration party, which is the extreme AI or die, AI at all cost. I don't agree with that at all. That's too far. So I think it's responsible AI, humanistic AI, human-centered AI, knowing that, again, it's here. It's going to be used, for good or for bad. And let's make sure that the people that are responsible are championing and its good use. In terms of where I've changed, I don't think I've shifted much. I think I see some of the bigger risks now, and it's hard sometimes to digest them. I have to compartmentalize sometimes. There was a podcast hosting today about meta glasses, and how a couple Harvard students use some off-the-shelf stuff to basically do facial recognition. So you could be walking down the street, see a stranger, and then just find out their name, address, and all this information about them. So there's definitely a need for regulation. There's definitely a need for education in terms of how to use these things effectively. So I think I'm still pretty much an AI optimist, which is like, it's here. We have to learn how to use it well. I think it's going to solve some major problems, climate, disease, like it's going to be able to do those things. But we also have to be mindful of the downsides. I don't believe in kind of the existential risk that it's going to, extinguish our species. I'm definitely not that, the doomsayers, but there's certainly things where it can do some damage, and it will. Like anything, you think about the computers, we have cybersecurity. Do we not advance computers because people are going to hack? Unfortunately, no. We have to learn how to deal with the hackers. So I think there's a similar thing in terms of any new technology. You have to balance. I think it's net positive, and therefore we just have to make sure we're, people who are in a position of power continue to do things. And I think regulation's coming. It's so clear, and it's gonna, the regulation is going to take a while to figure out what that balance is, so that we still are chasing innovation without, too much risk.
Yeah, you look at the news even this week and today. The Nobel Prize went to deep mind scientists who are using it for science, for chemistry, and so doing those great things, harnessing the power of AI. I'm with you. I'm still an optimist as well. There's going to be bad actors in all of this. We know, we've seen it. I always talk about the Pope in the puffy jacket, which is an image that came out virally at the beginning of 2024, and it's the Pope walking around in this big white puffy jacket, and everyone just sight unseen thought it to be real, and it wasn't real. It was just some dude that thought it'd be cool to see the Pope in a puffy jacket, right? So, but that bubbled up even to the point that when the Pope had a speech at the beginning of the year, he referenced that photo and how it is, technology in the times. It is a scary time to be living in, because we're going to have bad actors from time to time. But if we can, harness it for the power of good, like these Nobel Chemistry Prize winners did, that's what we're talking about. That's what gives me hope and optimism.
And I think at the end of the day, it's about educating yourself to be in a position to use it responsibly. So the one thing I think is that if you're out there going, I can't be bothered, or I'm worried about it, well, then you're going to risk keeping up with the times in terms of the skill set that's going to be required of people in careers. AI is now going to be like, if you don't have some sort of AI experience in the next 5 years, people are like, what's wrong with you? And more importantly, they're just going to go next and pass to the next resume. Or actually, they won't even be looking at resumes, because they'll just be feeding it to AI and saying, make sure that the resumes have certain things on them. And then it's just about, the more the more equipped we are to talk about it responsibly, to have, engaging conversations with all the people on the spectrum. I think it's important that it's not like, my way or the highway. It's about, let's have in that, like any good issue, have a open discourse to ensure that we're being thoughtful and mindful about it. And again, for me, it's always through the lens of, what's best for humans, even if one day I will say, I too welcome my computer overlords.
I think we need to include cautious optimism in that spectrum, because I think that is a fair description of both of you, your positions on it.
I think that's true.
Well, I'm glad we landed on a optimistic endpoint. It's always good to do that. Geoffrey, really do appreciate your time and your insights. Actually, before we let you go, Harold, we need to ask Geoffrey, because in our pre-production call, it came to light in talking about, I forget, Harold, how did this actually come up in conversation? I don't want to end this podcast until we draw this anecdote out of Geoffrey.
Yeah, for sure. I was thinking about that as well, where, we were talking about AI and from a humanist view, and using, EQ, and how close can AI get there. And I said, we're going to get to a day where, it's going to be like the dating game, but instead of 3 humans behind the curtain and someone trying to select which human to choose from, it's going to be two humans and an AI. And the bigger joke's going to be, do they pick the AI element? And that's kind of where we had started a conversation. And then Geoffrey, how did you respond?
Well, interestingly, if you go back to kind of the history of AI, it was about the Turing test. Could you tell the difference between, a human and a machine?
Yeah.
And for me, I would be really worried because I was on the dating game. I was bachelor number 3. This was early when I moved to LA. I kind of did it as a favor to a friend and auditioned. And you get in there and you're there a long time, and there's one session that goes before you. And so I got, bachelor number 3, you got asked all these questions, which I would have liked to have had my little ChatGPT there to help me answer some of them to see what would this person like to hear. And I won. So I don't have this on my resume. Maybe I should, winner of the dating games. So that you know that at least some woman out there once picked me among other people. And I'm glad there wasn't an AI to compete with.
By the way, was there one answer that you supplied that you think actually was decisive in her picking you?
I do. There were 2. One, she was a movie fan, and I referenced some movies that she loved. So there was that definite connection, she said.
And what movies were they? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think it was Swingers was, I said, "You're a beautiful baby," which is a line from the movie, and she loved the movie at the time. And then I think I said a classic like "It's a Wonderful Life," and if you pick me, we'll have a wonderful life. Something along those lines.
Okay. Did you have those pre-planned in the back of your pocket, ready to go, or did that just come out spontaneously?
I love movies, and so and I love classic movies, and so no, Swingers had been a movie that had been on my mind recently, so that was an easy. But the question, I don't know why, but they said if you wrote a book, what would the book be about, or something along those lines. And I said, well, I'd be the author of the Big Book of Magic, and I said, but be careful at the ending because there's a big reveal or something like that. And so the Big Book of Magic got some tricks for her.
Would you guys get to spend time as winners?
Well, that's the footnote of the story. I did win, and as soon as the episode, you get up and they bring you over. Chuck Woolery was the host, and they say that they prompt you. The producer says, "No matter where you go, I want you to look really excited." And now I just driven cross country and visited many of the monuments, and the people, they taped 2 shows. The people ahead of us had just gone a trip to Cabo San Lucas. So I'm like, all right, where are we going? Somewhere exotic. And so Chuck Woolery says, "You're off to the Grand Canyon." And I went, mother, no, because I had just been there. So thankfully, I don't think there's a copy anywhere I've been able to find of myself. But if you read my lips, I might have said something I didn't, But yeah, and then of course it was after the show. She had I have a boyfriend, and so I ended up going with a buddy of mine. We had a great time. But yeah, it was my 15 minutes of infamy.
That is a great story. And by the way, well told. You practice what you preach. Anyway, again, Geoffrey, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Harold, I think this is this is actually our first genuine co-hosting gig. First time you came on was really kind of as a guest. So this is your first co-hosting gig.
Harold, you did a bang up job.
I think you did great.
We got to keep repeating this. It's
it's
a snowball effect,
Yeah, and as Geoffrey said about AI, this is probably the worst we're going to ever do as a team. Right. We're only going to get better.
Go. That's right.
And I think this is pretty
better guesses.
No, you were great. You were great, Geoffrey.
Yeah,
and I don't think anybody's going to top that dating game anecdote. Right. So I think you're pretty secure there. Thanks so much for joining us. Today we spoke with Geoffrey Klein, CEO and founder of 9dots, which helps businesses create compelling story-driven visual content. Geoffrey is also an AI consultant, TEDx speaker, Wharton lecturer, best-selling author, and of course a master storyteller. This is Charles Epstein with the X Factor podcast. Thanks for listening.